You saved us. How one rookie pilot's reckless dive bombing saved an entire regiment. April 3, 1943. Central Tunisia, North Africa. The P-47 Thunderbolt's engine screamed as Lieutenant Jack Reynolds pushed the control stick forward, diving straight into a wall of anti-aircraft fire. His commanding officer's voice crackled through the headset. "Abort immediately! You are not cleared to engage." Below him, 800 American infantrymen trapped in a narrow ravine watched German panzer tanks closing in for the kill. Jack's gloved hand stayed steady on the stick, and in that moment, with black flak bursts erupting around his wings and every regulation screaming at him to pull up, he made a choice that would echo through decades. He was 19 years old, had never fired his guns in combat, and was about to disobey a direct order that could end his career or his life. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, we want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from right now? It's amazing to think that people from dozens of countries, speaking different languages, living different lives, all gather here to remember the courage of those who came before us. If this story moves you, hit that like button and subscribe, so we can keep bringing these forgotten heroes back to life. Now, let's return to that desert sky in 1943. The North African campaign in early 1943 was a grinding war of attrition, fought across landscapes that seemed designed to kill. Daytime temperatures reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Sandstorms could strip paint from aircraft and blind entire columns for hours. Water was more precious than ammunition. And in this hostile crucible, American forces were learning hard lessons against German veterans who had spent 2 years perfecting desert warfare. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps was in retreat. Yes, but it was a fighting retreat. Every hill became a fortress. Every ravine became a killing ground. The Germans traded space for Allied blood, and they were good at it. Jack Reynolds had grown up in a place where the horizon stretched forever, but it was wheat fields, not sand dunes. His hometown of Lebanon, Kansas, sat almost at the exact geographic center of the United States. Population, 489. His father ran the only garage in town. His mother played organ at the Methodist Church every Sunday. Jack had learned to fix engines before he learned algebra, and he'd flown his first plane at 16. A rickety Piper Cub owned by a crop duster who let him take the stick on calm days. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, Jack was 17. By the time he was eligible to enlist at 18, he'd already memorized every aircraft silhouette in the spotter's guide. Flight school had been a blur. The Army Air Forces needed pilots desperately. In 1942 alone, the training pipeline pushed through over 65,000 new aviators. Standards were high, but timelines were brutal. Jack completed basic flight training in 6 months, advanced combat training in 4 more. He earned his wings in February 1943 and shipped out to North Africa 3 weeks later. He'd logged 127 hours of flight time when he arrived at his squadron's airfield outside Algiers. Most of the veterans had over 1,000. They looked at him the way you look at a puppy that's wandered onto a construction site. Sweet, well-meaning, probably about to get crushed. The 312th Fighter Squadron flew P-47 Thunderbolts, massive single-seat fighters that weighed 7 tons fully loaded. The P-47 was nicknamed the Jug because it looked like a milk jug with wings, stubby, thick, ungraceful. But it was tough. It could absorb punishment that would shred lighter aircraft. Its 8.50 caliber machine guns could tear apart anything on the ground or in the air. And it could carry 2,000 pounds of bombs under its wings, turning a fighter into a dive bomber when needed. The Jug wasn't pretty, but it brought pilots home. Jack fell in love with it the first time he pulled it into a climb, and felt that massive Pratt & Whitney engine roar beneath him. For his first 3 weeks in theater, Jack flew reconnaissance missions. High-altitude observation runs where the goal was to spot enemy movements and get out without being seen. It was important work, but it felt distant, disconnected. He'd fly over columns of trucks or tank formations and mark their positions on a map, then turn for home. Other squadrons would handle the actual attacks. Jack understood the logic. Green pilots needed to build flight hours and situational awareness before being trusted with combat missions. But every night, lying in his cot, listening to distant artillery, he felt the pull. Those weren't just map coordinates down there. They were men, Americans, and when he flew over them, he could see how exposed they were, how vulnerable. The morning of April 3rd began like any other. 6 aircraft took off at 30 hours for a routine reconnaissance sweep along the Tunisian coast road. Jack was flying wing position, his job to stay in formation and watch for enemy fighters. The sky was clear, visibility unlimited. Below, the desert stretched out in shades of tan and brown, broken occasionally by the dark green of an oasis or the gray ribbon of a road. The squadron leader's voice came through the radio, calm and professional, marking waypoints and giving minor course corrections. It was almost boring. Then they reached the valley west of Matur. Jack saw the dust clouds first, long plumes rising from the valley floor, too many to be a simple convoy. He banked slightly for a better angle and felt his stomach tighten. Tanks. Dozens of them. German panzers in a coordinated formation, moving fast toward a narrow ravine where he could see American positions, foxholes, machine gun nests, a cluster of supply trucks. The Americans were dug in, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. And they had no idea what was coming from the north. Jack switched to the emergency frequency, the channel that infantry units monitored. What he heard made his blood run cold. Voices overlapping in barely controlled panic. "We're taking fire from 3 sides. Where's our armor support? Radio command, we need air cover now." One voice stood out, younger than the others, cracking with fear. "They're coming through the ridge line. We can't hold this. We can't." The transmission cut off in a burst of static. Jack's hand tightened on the stick. He knew that kind of fear. He'd heard it in training films, in briefings about units that got overrun. These weren't soldiers reporting tactical updates. These were men who thought they were about to die. The squadron leader came back on the primary channel. "All aircraft, we have enemy armor sighted. Mark position and return to base. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." One by one, the other P-47s banked west toward home. Standard procedure. They were reconnaissance, not ground attack. Command would analyze the report, assign a bombing mission, coordinate with artillery. By tomorrow, maybe the day after, someone would hit those tanks. But by tomorrow, the men in that ravine would be dead. Jack watched his squadron pull away. He looked down at the tanks, now less than 2 miles from the American positions. He checked his fuel gauge, 3/4 full. He checked his ordnance. 2 500-pound bombs, 1 under each wing. He'd trained for this. Hundreds of practice runs. Release altitude, dive angle, pull-out speed. He knew the numbers by heart. "Command, this is Reynolds. Request permission to engage ground targets." Silence. Then sharp and final. "Negative, Reynolds. You are not authorized. Return to base immediately." Jack didn't reply. He rolled the Thunderbolt into a steep bank and pointed the nose down. The world tilted. The horizon disappeared. All that existed was the earth rushing up and the tanks gleaming in the sun like insects on a griddle. His wingman's voice exploded in his ears. "Reynolds, what are you doing? Pull up. That's an order." But Jack was already committed. The altimeter spun backward. 8,000 feet. 7,000. The air screamed past the canopy. At 6,000 feet, the German gunners saw him. Black puffs of flak began appearing in the air around him, dozens of them, like deadly flowers blooming in empty sky. Each one was a shell packed with shrapnel, exploding at a preset altitude. If he flew through one, it would shred his aircraft like paper. Jack jinked left, then right, never holding a straight line for more than 2 seconds. The G-forces pressed him into his seat. His vision began to tunnel. 5,000 feet. 4,000. The tanks were individual shapes now. He could see their turrets rotating, trying to track him. He could see the infantry positions behind them, tiny figures scrambling for cover. At 3,000 feet, he armed the bombs. A red light on his panel turned green. 2 switches, one for each wing. His thumb hovered over the release button. The textbook said to drop at 1,500 feet for maximum accuracy. Any lower and the blast could catch you. Any higher and you risked a miss. Jack's training instructor had been clear. You get 1 pass. Make it count or don't make it at all. 2,000 feet. The lead tank filled his gun sight. A Panzer IV with desert camouflage and a black cross on the turret. 1,500 feet. He could see the commander standing in the hatch. 1,000 feet. Now. Jack pressed both release buttons simultaneously. The Thunderbolt lurched upward as 4,000 pounds of weight dropped away. He yanked the stick back with both hands, pulling 7 Gs, his vision graying at the edges. The ground was so close he could see individual rocks. Then the world turned white. The blast wave hit him like a fist, flipping the aircraft sideways. Alarms screamed. The control stick fought him. His left wing was trailing smoke. But he was climbing. He was alive. And behind him, where the lead Panzer had been, there was only fire. The explosion had been perfect. Both bombs hit within 30 feet of each other, right in the center of the German formation. The lead tank disintegrated, its ammunition cooking off in a secondary blast that sent the turret spiraling into the air. The tank behind it flipped onto its side, tracks blown off, crew scrambling out through the hatches. The rest of the column ground to a confused halt, commanders shouting contradictory orders, infantry diving for cover. In the chaos, no one noticed the lone American aircraft limping away to the south, trailing smoke and barely holding altitude. On the ground, in the ravine, Sergeant Thomas McKinley of the 45th Infantry Regiment stood frozen in his foxhole. He'd been writing what he thought was a final letter to his wife when the world exploded. Now he stared at the sky, at the smoke trails, at the burning wreckage of the tanks that had been seconds away from overrunning his position. Around him, other men were emerging from cover, eyes wide, voices rising in disbelief. "Did you see that? 1 plane, 1 goddamn plane. Who was that?" Nobody knew, but they were alive, and the German advance had stopped. Jack nursed the Thunderbolt home on a wounded engine and a prayer, the 40-minute return flight feeling like hours, as every vibration threatened to shake the aircraft apart. He brought the jug in, hot and hard, bouncing once before settling into a screeching, smoking landing as ground crews ran toward him with fire extinguishers. His commanding officer, Major Frank Harrison, was waiting with a stone face, ready to confine him to quarters for disobeying orders, until a jeep skidded to a stop and a radio operator delivered urgent news from Infantry Command. The 45th Infantry Regiment reports that an unidentified airstrike destroyed enemy armor that was about to overrun their position, saving an estimated 400 men. Harrison's expression shifted from anger to something unreadable as he looked at Jack, then smiled a complicated smile holding equal parts frustration and respect. "You're still confined to quarters, but the court-martial hearing just became an accommodation review. And Reynolds, next time you decide to save an entire regiment, try to get permission first." The story spread like wildfire through every American unit in North Africa. The rookie pilot who'd gone rogue, the impossible dive-bombing run that some officers called reckless and others called inspired. But the men on the ground, the infantrymen who'd been in that ravine, they called it salvation. Letters started arriving. Handwritten notes from soldiers Jack had never met. "You saved my life. My kids will grow up because of you. I saw you come out of the sky like an angel." One letter came from Sergeant McKinley, the same man whose voice Jack had heard on the radio. It was 3 pages long, written in careful script. The last paragraph said, "I don't know if I believe in miracles, sir, but I believe in you. Whatever they do to you, know that 200 of us will spend the rest of our lives grateful you were in the sky that day." Jack was not court-martialed. He was grounded for 1 week, officially reprimanded for unauthorized engagement, and simultaneously recommended for the Silver Star for valor. The contradiction was pure military logic: punish the violation, reward the result. His squadron mates, the ones who'd thought he was too green to matter, started treating him differently. Not with awe, with respect. The quiet kind. The kind you give to someone who's proven they'll do what needs doing, consequences be damned. Jack flew 32 more combat missions over North Africa. He never broke formation again. He didn't need to. When he led, others followed. When he called a target, they trusted him. That trust was earned, not through bravado, but through one moment of moral clarity when every rule said to turn away and his conscience said to dive. The broader impact of Jack's action rippled through Air Force doctrine in ways that were never officially acknowledged but universally understood. In staff meetings and tactical briefings, the story became a case study, not in disobedience, but in initiative, in judgment under pressure. The Army Air Forces in 1943 were still learning how to fight a modern war. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of previous conflicts, this war moved too fast for every decision to flow up the chain of command. Pilots needed discretion. They needed to be trusted to make life-and-death calls in seconds. Jack's dive proved that sometimes the man in the cockpit sees things command cannot. Statistical analysis later revealed the full scope of what happened that day. The German armored column consisted of 11 Panzer IV tanks and approximately 200 infantry. They were part of a larger encirclement operation designed to cut off 3 American regiments, nearly 2,000 men total. Jack's attack didn't just save the men in the immediate vicinity. It disrupted the entire German tactical plan. The destroyed lead tank carried the formation's commanding officer and all the radio equipment for coordinating the assault. Without leadership or communication, the attack stalled. American reinforcements arrived within 90 minutes. What could have been a catastrophic defeat became a successful defense. 1 pilot, 2 bombs, a cascading effect that changed the outcome of an entire engagement. Jack Reynolds returned home in December 1945. He was 21 years old and felt 50. He'd flown 127 combat missions, been shot down once, crash-landed twice, and accumulated enough citations to cover his dress uniform chest. But he didn't talk about any of it. He enrolled in agricultural school, married a nurse named Eleanor whom he'd met at a war bond rally, and settled in Oregon. He became a civilian flight instructor, teaching young pilots the basics of aviation: takeoffs, landings, navigation, weather, the simple things. When students asked if he'd been in the war, he'd nod and change the subject. He didn't think his story was special. He'd done what needed doing. That was all. But the men he saved never forgot. In 1961, a reunion was organized for the 45th Infantry Regiment. More than 300 veterans attended. They voted unanimously to invite one special guest, Jack Reynolds. He almost didn't go. Eleanor convinced him. When he walked into the hotel ballroom in Colorado Springs, he expected polite applause, maybe a handshake or two. Instead, 300 men stood as one. They didn't cheer. They didn't shout. They simply stood in silence, a wall of aging soldiers in their 50s and 60s, looking at the quiet man in the doorway. Then, slowly, one by one, they began to clap. It lasted 5 minutes. Jack stood there, embarrassed and overwhelmed, tears running down his face. That night, an old sergeant with white hair and a cane approached him at the bar. "You don't remember me," the man said, "but I remember you. I was in that ravine. I'd made peace with dying. Then you came." He gripped Jack's hand. "I got to see my daughter grow up. I got to walk her down the aisle. I got to hold my grandson. All because you didn't turn around. Jack didn't know what to say. He settled for, "I'm glad you made it home." The sergeant smiled. "We all did. Because of you." Jack Reynolds passed away in 2007 at the age of 83. His obituary in the Portland newspaper was modest. Veteran, flight instructor, husband, father, grandfather. It didn't mention the Silver Star. It didn't mention Tunisia. War is built on rules for good reasons, but it's won by men who know when to break them. And the men in that ravine, looking up at the sky in 1943 as fire rained down on their enemies, learned a truth that stayed with them forever.